Hi, friends and family. I'm here tonight. Hello, Ophelia. How are you? Kisses from Grandma. We're gonna read Curious George Rides a Bike by H.A. Ray. Hi to Royce, too, and Kai. All right, here we go. Oh, somebody wrote in this book and gave it to somebody named, it says, Dear Crystal, from Aunt Jeannie. All right, so let's start the story. Who's that? Is that old Curious George? He looks like he's getting up out of bed, or maybe he's going to bed. Let's see. This is George. I'm tired with, let's start over. This is George. He lived with his friend, the man with the yellow hat. He was a good little monkey and always very curious. This morning, George was curious the moment he woke up because he knew it was a special day. Oh, what do we have here? Let's read it. At breakfast, George's friend said, Today we're going to celebrate because just 3 years ago this day I brought you home with me from the jungle. So tonight I'll take you to the animal show. But first I have a surprise for you. Ooh, a surprise. So it's kind of like his birthday. Looks like it's in that big box. He took George out to the yard where a big box was standing. George was very curious. There's the man with the yellow hat. All right, let's change the page. See if I can change the page. There we go. Oh, look what's in the box. Out of the box came a bicycle. George was delighted. That's what he'd always wanted. He knew how to ride a bicycle, but he had never had one of his own. How did he already know? I must go now, said the man, but I'll be back in time for the show. Be careful with your new bike and keep close to the house while I am gone. Oh, telling George, stay close to the house, but he got a new bike. I don't know, monkeys don't seem to listen very well. They're very curious. Looks like he's doing wheelies and all kinds of stuff. It says, George could ride very well. He could even do all sorts of tricks. Monkeys are good at that. For instance, he could ride this way with both hands off the handlebar. No-handed? Wow. And he could ride this way like a cowboy, doing wheelies, a wild bronco. And he could also ride backwards. But after a while, George got tired of doing tricks. Oh, there's his friend. Let's see what his friend's doing. He went out into the street. The newsboy was just passing by with his bag full of papers. That's a fine bike you have there, he said to George. How would you like to help me deliver newspapers? He handed George the bag and told him to do one side of the street first, then turn back and do the other. George was very proud as he rode off with his bag. See that? He's got the bag full of papers. People used to get the newspaper delivered to their door by the newspaper boy. There's the neighborhood. Looks like a pretty fun, colorful neighborhood. Let's see what it says. He started to deliver the papers on one side of the street, as he had been told. When he came to the last house, he saw a little river in the distance. George was curious. He wanted to know what that river was like. So instead of turning back to deliver the rest of the papers, he just went on. Uh-oh. What's he doing there? There's a lake, it looks like. There was a lot to see at the river. A man was fishing from the bridge. A duck family was paddling downstream, and two boys were playing with their boats. George would have liked to stop and look at the boats, but he was afraid the boys might find out that he had not delivered the papers. So he rode on. While riding along, George kept thinking of boats all the time. It would be so much fun to have a boat. But how could he get one? He thought, and then he had an idea. He got off the bicycle, took a newspaper out of the bag, and began to fold it. First, he folded down the corners like this. Then he folded both edges up, brought them ends together, and flattened it sideways. Then he turned one corner up, and then the other one, and then brought them back the ends together and flattened it sideways. Then gently he pulled the ends open, and there was his boat. Now the moment had come to launch the boat. Would it float? It did. So George decided to make some more boats. Finally, he had used up all the papers and had made so many boats that he could not count them, a whole fleet. Oh my goodness. Look at them all. Watching his fleet sailing down the river, George felt like an admiral. But watching his fleet, he forgot to watch where he was going. Uh-oh. Oh, did he hit a rock? Suddenly, there was a terrible jolt. The bicycle had hit a rock, and George flew off the seat head first. Oh no, look at that. Luckily, George was not hurt, but the front wheel of the bicycle was all out of shape, and the tire was blown out. Oh no. George tried to ride the bicycle, but of course it wouldn't go. So he started carrying it, but soon it got too heavy. George did not know what to do. His bike was spoiled and the newspapers were gone. He wished he'd listened to his friend and kept close to the house. Now he just stood there and cried. Suddenly his face brightened. Why hadn't he forgotten that he could ride on one wheel? He tried it and it worked. He hardly started out again when he saw something. So he's going to do a wheelie home. Good idea, huh? Oh, what do we have there? He had never seen before. Rolling toward him came an enormous tractor with huge trailers behind. Looking out of the trailers were all sorts of animals. To George, it looked like a zoo on wheels. The tractor stopped, and two men jumped out. Well, well, said one of them. A little monkey who can ride a bike. Bronco fashion. We can use you in our animal show tonight. I'm the director of the show, and this is Bob. He can straighten your wheel and fix that flat in no time, and then we'll take you along to places where the show is going to be. So the three of them got into the cab and drove off. Maybe you could play a fanfare while you ride your bike in the show, the director said. I have a bugle for you right here, and later on you'll get a green coat and a cap, just like Bob's. Oh, putting that monkey to work. Look at this. On the showgrounds, everybody was busy getting things ready for the show. I must do some work now, said the director. Meanwhile, you have a look around and get acquainted with all the animals. But you must not feed them, especially the ostrich, because he will eat anything and might get very sick afterwards. There's a giraffe, there's the ostrich, there's a kangaroo. Well, looks like he went over to the ostrich. Let's see. George was curious, would the ostrich really eat anything? He wouldn't eat a bugle, or would he? George went a little closer up to the cage, and before he knew it, that ostrich had snatched the bugle and tried to swallow it. But a bugle is hard to swallow, even for an ostrich. It got stuck in his throat. Funny sounds came out of the bugle, as the ostrich was struggling with it all. Blue in the face, George was frightened. Uh-oh. Fortunately, the men had heard the noise. They came rushing to the cage and got the bugle out of the ostrich's throat, just in time. The director was very angry with George. We cannot use a little monkey who doesn't do as they are told, he said. Of course, you cannot take part in the show now. We will have to send you home. George had to sit on a bench all by himself, and nobody even looked at him. He was terribly sorry for what he had done, but now it was too late. He had spoiled everything. Meanwhile, the ostrich, always hungry, had got a hold of a string dangling near his cage. This happened to be the string which held the door of the cage of the baby bear. As the ostrich nibbled it, the door opened and the baby bear got out. He ran away as fast as he could and made straight for a high tree near the camp. Nobody had seen it but George, and George was not supposed to leave his bench. But this was an emergency. So he jumped up, grabbed the bugle, and blew it as loud as he could. Then he rushed to his bicycle. The men had heard the alarm and thought at first that George had been naughty again. But when they saw the empty cage and the ostrich nibbling at the string, they knew what had happened. George raced towards the tree, far ahead of the men. By now the bear had climbed quite high, and this was dangerous because little bears can climb up a tree easily, but coming down is much harder. See the bear, he's all the way up there. They may fall and get hurt. The men were worried. They did not know how to get him down safely, but George had a plan. With the bag over his shoulder, he went up the tree as fast as only a monkey can, and then he reached the baby bear. There he is. There's George going up to the baby bear. Oh, look at that. He put him in his bag and carefully let him down to the men so that the men could safely catch him. Everybody cheered when George had come down from the tree. "You are a brave little monkey," said the director, "and of course you may ride your bike and play the bugle in the show." There's the show, look at that. Finally, the show was on. The whole town had come to see it, and how surprised they were to discover George on his bike right in the middle of it. The newsboy was there too, and also the man with the yellow hat. Do you see the man with the yellow hat right here? And the newsboy? And with the yellow hat, who had been looking for George everywhere and was happy to have found him at last, the newsboy was glad to have his bag again, and the people from the other side of the street whose papers George had made into boats were not angry with him anymore. George! When the time had come for George to say goodbye, the director let him keep the coat and the cap and the bugle, and then George and his friend got into the car and went. They went home in the car. That's the end. Good night. That was Curious George Rides a Bike. Sweet dreams, everyone. Good night. Thanks for watching Grandma Alicia's Storytime. Remember to subscribe, and if you feel like it, you can comment your favorite book below, or tell us what you thought about the book we just read. Thank you.